Great. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to put this here, and if you don't mind, I do things a little differently. I like to come down here. I don't read from a presentation. Is that okay? Is it? And also, if you have a question throughout, please raise your hand. I want this very much to be a discussion. I want us to have a conversation about our work. When Betty and I we were talking and preparing this, we want to make sure that you understand that what we're going to talk about today is a comprehensive first-year experience program. The models that you're going to hear and the examples that we're going to hear today, not only from myself, but also from our students and the conversations that we're going to have, are about the programs that are either semester-long or a year-long first-year experience program. So I don't want you, those of you who are still in those new stages of developing your first-year experience program, and it may only be a couple of days right now, I don't want you to say, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that. This is about the possibilities and the things that we're doing in the United States, and I hope that you can take our ideas and apply them in a way that is going to be fruitful for you. Does that make sense to everyone? Good. And I also walk around and want to make sure you're paying attention. No, we're going to have a conversation. This is going to be fun. We're going to have a conversation on this. So I was having the conversation. Thank you, Tensilla, and to Lubo for inviting me here. And we're having a great time. My husband and my son have joined me. As you can see, they did join me this morning. I don't think they'd like to hear me speak anymore. I think they hear enough of that. But we're going to have this conversation on what does it mean to become student ready. Student ready through the design and intentionally designed first-year experiences. And these are some of the questions that shape our work at AAC&U. I'm going to tell you about AAC&U in just a minute. But how do we actually build a shared commitment? Shared. This is a shared responsibility, our collective responsibility for student success. How do we actually do that in a way that will provide all of our students, and we say college or universities in the United States, all of our students with the high-quality learned experiences that will prepare them for work, life, and citizenship? This is one of the questions that drives our work at AAC&U. Another question is, how can we accelerate broad-scale systemic innovation to advance the educational practices that we know from our research? Engage diversity, which is an issue in the United States. I mean, I'm not going to give you the statistics or the demographics, and we know, but probably many of you know that the student population in the United States is changing. It is changing very rapidly. And our inequities in student outcomes, whether that's graduation rates, completion rates, persistence, even with student learning, those gaps are actually widening in the United States. They're not getting smaller. So we are actually facing our own issues and our own struggles in the United States with that. And so how do we actually engage diversity and challenge the inequities to make what we call excellence inclusive? You're going to hear from the students this morning, where they're going to give you examples of how they engage diversity through first-year experience programs. And what does that mean for their sense of belonging? We want to give you as many practical examples as we can during the morning session before lunch. We also ask this question is, how can campus educators design innovative curricular pathways? Pathways is a big word in the United States right now. I don't know if it's the same here, but we spend a lot of time talking about pathways in the United States. How do we actually create intentional pathways for students? How do we give them the knowledge or the information to know how they are going to progress from first year to second year to third year to fourth year to graduation? How do we make them focus in on the most critical aspects of what they need to accomplish in order to receive their degrees? So AAC&U, how many of you are familiar with the Association of American Colleges and Universities? Of course, well, to mention, yes, they're my colleagues. So AAC&U, we are the leading national association concerned with quality in undergraduate education. We just celebrated our centennial in 2015. We just celebrated, we've been around for more than 100 years. We have more than 1,400 institutional members as part of our network at the Association of American Colleges and Universities. And they represent all types of institutions in the United States. our 2-year, our 4-year institutions, our regional comprehensive, our public, our private, our research institutions. So our association, we have the opportunity to work with faculty members and academic leaders from all types of institutions in the United States. So I just want to make sure that there's clarity on that. We have a network of over 50,000 faculty and academic leaders that we work with. Our publications go out, and actually it's more than that now. We're looking at probably like around 66,000 receive our publications and our announcements and get the opportunity to participate in our conferences. So we have a pretty wide network and very inclusive network. And we consider ourselves a meeting grounds for all higher education. Our work at AAC&U is focused around what we say liberal education and America's promise. It is our national signature initiative at AAC&U. I heard Bridget when she was talking yesterday about the learning outcomes. You have learning outcomes here. You call them graduation, yes, attributes, exactly, graduation attributes. We call them learning outcomes in the United States. And we say liberal education and America's promise, regardless of the degree, that all students have the right to a high-quality liberal education that will prepare them for work, life, and citizenship. And here are some of the essential learning outcomes that many of our campuses across the United States have adopted. Knowledge of human cultures, intellectual and practical skills, personal and social responsibility, integrative and applied learning. These are probably very similar to your graduate attributes, right? Somewhat? And then if you break them down, these things, students should be able to engage in inquiry and analysis, quantitative reasoning, critical thinking, written communication. So we have that in common. When you talk about the graduate attributes and you also talk about the learning outcomes. That is what most of our work focuses on at AAC&U. Quality in undergraduate teaching and learning, but also students' achievement of the learning. So, where are we in this? Where are we in the work that we're doing? We spend a lot of time in the United States talking about whether or not students are college ready, right? We say, are our students ready for college? Well, we decided a couple of years ago that it was important for us to flip the script and to have a different type of conversation, to create a paradigm shift in discussion. Instead of talking about our students being college ready, what would it mean for our institutions to be student ready? For our institutions to actually be ready for the students that we admit and that we serve. It creates a different paradigm in our thinking. It makes us think that what are our roles as educators? And we consider everyone who is at a university, who is at a college, an educator. If they interact with students, if they have the opportunity to engage with them, to talk with them about their educational pursuits and their studies, we see it as a comprehensive process and a comprehensive and a collective responsibility. So what then would make an institution student ready? And that's the question that we're posing to many of our educators across the country, because we want to lead a paradigm shift in this. Because we don't want to spend all of our time focusing in on college preparation without asking the question about what we need to do as educators to be successful. And that's why I want the framing of this conversation to be this morning. As your role as an educator, what would it mean for you to be a student-ready educator? For you to think about the preparation or the designs of your campus practices, your institution's practices, policies and procedures in a way that asks, are we ready for the students that are at our institution? And what would that mean for the work that we have to do? So this is our book. This is a book that I wrote with my colleagues. It came out last year, Becoming a Student-Ready College, A New Culture of Leadership for Student Success. This is written with one of my colleagues, Susan Albertine from AAC&U, but also the president for the Institute of Higher Education Policy in Washington, D.C., that's Michelle Cooper, and with Nicole McDonald and Thomas Major from the Lumina Foundation. So we wanted to get perspectives, not only from our foundation leaders, but from our policy leaders, but also from those of us who work directly with faculty on a regular basis, and that's us at AAC&U. So this is our book that came out. Here are some of the questions that I want you to think about as we go through our presentation today. What would it mean for you to be a student-ready educator? What would you do differently? Based on what you're going to hear, not only from me, but what you're going to hear from our students from the University of Michigan, based on what they tell you about the experiences and the power of their first-year programming, with their sense of belonging and the ability to engage diversity, and to understand the complexities of the opportunities and challenges that they faced as students, or that many of our students faced across our institutions, what would you do differently as a student-ready educator here in South Africa? How would you apply what you're learning today and yesterday in a way that focuses not on saying students need to be ready for college, but what do I need to do as an educator to be ready? And then we also want to ask you, how do the campus values, your institutional values, actually support the work that you want to do? How does your institution support the work that you want to do to make it ready for the students that you serve? And you come from such a variety of institutions here in South Africa, serving different types of students at different levels of preparation. What does that mean for the values of your institution, and how do you get prepared for them? How do campus leaders engage the whole community and governors in this effort, so it's not just the will of the few and the mighty, but it's actually a shared responsibility across your institution? And how do you make the case? And I know that there was a session yesterday, a pre-conference session about using data and using data effectively, that you have access to data. How do you make the case for the change that you want to lead on your campus related to even scaling or expanding or strengthening your first-year experience program? How do you make that case? How do you make that shared value? We're going to start with this word, intentionality. It is key in the work that we do at AAC&U. We talk a lot about the intentional design of our first-year experiences, of what we call high-impact practices. I'll talk a little. Have you heard of that phrase, high-impact practices? Yes, good. We ask this, we at AAC&U, when we talk about intentionality, we called it a cycle of intentional learning. Intentional learning, where you start with the mission and the goals and the values. And then that goes into how you design the curriculum. You're going to hear me say a lot about coherence today. The coherence of the first-year experience program. The coherence of our curriculum. What does that look like? And what does that mean for how we teach and how we educate our students? And then how do we assess it? How do we actually assess the work that we're doing to make sure that students are making progress and that they are learning? At the heart of every first-year experience program is a focus on learning, preparing students to learn, to engage in the learning environment. There is a project, and I hope that you have a chance to look this up, that is sponsored by ASCU, another national association in the United States, called Reimagining the First-Year Experience. Reimagining the First-Year Experience, or the first-year program, where they're asking deep questions about the coherence of the first-year experience and the role of the faculty in creating that connection and that transparency for student success. So we talk about the intentional learning model, how it's all connected in a way that requires us to think about continuous improvement and reflection. I'm so glad that Bridget mentioned that yesterday about reflection and the ability to trust, and to trust the process and to trust the educational experience. So this is the question. How do we help students become intentional learners? How does your first-year experience program, whether it's an extensive program, whether it's a 2-day program, how does that program prepare students or help them to become intentional learners? Do they understand the goals and the mission of the program and the value to how it's going to set them up for success? Can they articulate that as a result of participating in that program? Do they understand the connection to their learning experience? These are questions that you should be asking as student-ready educators. And if you don't know the answers to that, then you should engage in additional inquiry to find out whether or not those things are happening. At ACU, we gathered a couple of years ago, because Ancilla asked me to bring examples. So I'm going to bring examples to you. We gathered a group of educators, and scholars, and stakeholders, and state leaders for a multi-year project where we asked them about general education. We have general education in the United States where all students are required to take that. I started looking at these principles when I was preparing for this presentation, and I realized that they're more than just general education principles. These are principles that can be applied to your first year experience program. And I'm going to walk through some of these and give you examples of these. If you think about the values and consider that these are maps and markers of a strong general education program in the United States, let's take out the language of general education and put in first year experience maps and markers. So take away general education for a second and think about first year experience. Because if it is required, or we want to make it required, or we have the vision that every student is going to participate in first year experience, just like they participate in general education in the United States, these are some of the elements that are critical for that to be a comprehensive model. You're going to hear from the students talk about various aspects of this today. A focus on proficiency. A focus on proficiency. That's the learning piece. Students actually understanding how the first year experience is going to help prepare them for the learning process. How it's actually going to engage them in understanding how the first year experience is a foundational piece to their development of the proficiencies that you have set up as being part of their majors or part of their degree requirements. How then do we help make that transparent for them? How does the first year experience help students develop agency? Agency. We, as a group of scholars across the United States, when we were putting together these principles, we had a discussion about the difference between agency and empowerment. This is where you're going to have to talk to me, so we're going to stop for a second, because in order for this to be an educational experience, I need you to have a conversation with me. Why do you think we decided on agency instead of empowerment as a fundamental principle of our educational experience? Why do you think we did that? What do you think the difference is between agency and empowerment? Any ideas? No ideas? Okay, so let's think about it this way. Your first year experience. How many people here have first year experience? It should be almost everyone, right? Is your first year experience program, if you had to evaluate it right now, does it empower students at this particular point? Do you think it's empowering to students to go through the first year experience? What makes it an empowering experience? What makes it valuable to the student? Yes, please.
I would imagine that they get information that they would not have otherwise.
Exactly. They get information that they wouldn't have otherwise because of their first year experience. It gets them prepared to enter into university. Yes. Anybody else? Yes. It helps them to adapt into the new environment. Yes. It helps them to make the transition. We talk a lot about transition from where they were and where they're going to be in the university. Yes. What else? Yes, it gives them self-esteem to say, I can do this. I can be successful in this educational environment. Yes. So when we say that an educational experience is empowering them, that knowledge then gives them the understanding that they can be successful, right? But when we talk about in the United States, we want students to develop agency. We want them to develop agency and self-direction. What we say is that the educational experience, by giving them the opportunity to have access to information, giving them the tools and the resources to know how to be successful in the educational environment, will help them develop agency, help them be decision makers, helping them be responsible, helping them to be active, not only in their community and in their educational community, but also in the communities that they participate in throughout their educational experience and beyond. We want the educational experience to help them or to prepare them to have agency, to be decision makers, to be leaders, to be part of an educational environment that will help them. Not only are they being receivers, but they are participating. We talk a lot about reciprocal engagement. It's a reciprocity. It's not just about students being the receivers, but they are learners, and they are engaged in the educational experience. We also talk a lot about integrative learning and problem-based inquiry. You're going to hear the students talk about their research and how that's been embedded into the first year experience and how they ask questions that are critical to them, that are problem-based, that are real world, the questions that reflect their diversity and their background and their educational experiences. How then do you embed those opportunities in a first year experience program so that students create there's a sense of belonging? That's one of the things that we talk about in the United States. And then we also talk about the question of equity. Are we providing the educational opportunities based on the needs of the students? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then transparency and assessment. Are we being transparent with our students? Do the first year experience programs that you've designed, are they transparent? Do the students know the value? Do they understand the reasoning why they are experiencing or participating in these educational experiences? So here we have the high impact practices that you said that you are familiar with. These are the high impact practices through research in the United States that we've done from our partnership with the National Survey of Student Engagement, that students who participate in these particular educational experiences, it will help them achieve the outcomes. They will have higher graduation and retention rates, higher completion rates. They will also have higher achievement of their graduation requirements, or the learning outcomes, or the graduation attributes, as you call them here. And we have key elements of the high impact practices that make them actually high impact from the work of George Koo and Ken O'Donnell that they've been doing. Is that you have a performance expectation set at appropriately high levels. There's actual investment of time and effort, and interactions with faculty and peers about substantive matters. Experiences with diversity, frequent, timely, and constructive feedback. These are not just principles of the high impact practices. These are principles of the work that you do on a regular basis. Things that you actually can apply. Where in your first year experience programs, because first year experience, you see seminars and experiences, are high impact practices. But if they are not tied to students' achievement of the learning outcomes, if they are not transparent, if they are not helping students develop agency and self-direction, if they are not valuable, then what we say in the United States is they're just a practice. They're not high impact. We cannot call a first year experience high impact unless it actually helps students achieve the outcomes that have been defined as a desired result of that particular experience. I want to go back and make sure that I say that again so you're saying. Just having a first year experience does not make it high impact. Having a first year experience that is quality, that is a quality learning experience, needs to consider these elements. And it needs to be valuable to the students. And it needs to achieve the desired results that you have defined as leaders of first year experience. Students need to be able to achieve that. Does that make sense? I'm going to stop there for a second because I want to make sure that we're making the connection. What we don't do, and we are at fault for this in the United States too, is that what we've done sometimes is said, oh, here's the list. And my colleagues from the United States, and they're smiling at me, will know this. They'll say, here's the list, and we're going to implement them And we're going to implement these practices, but we haven't spent the time thinking about the needs of the students. And what actually, because just because at your institution, the students may need something else, doesn't mean that you're going to replicate it at your institution or your institution. You're going to think critically about the students that you're serving at your institution and figure out the components of your first year experience that is going to serve them the best. That is what it means to be student ready, is that you actually spent the time thinking about who are my students and who are we serving and what components, and I'm hearing all these great ideas that we're hearing about at this conference. You can't go back and implement everything. So your first question is, what aspects am I going to take from the knowledge that I'm gaining here that are going to serve my students at my institution in the best way? And what are the desired results from it? Because yesterday I think I heard Bridget talk about not best practices, but good practices. Well, my mentor, Stella Ben-Simone at the University of Southern California, we don't even talk about best practices. She talks about best practitioners. Best practitioners. The role is, the engagement here is not about you taking the practices that you're learning and then plopping them down in your first year experience. What our goal is here is for you to think about, how can I be a best practitioner? How can I be a student-ready leader or educator and take these ideas and then apply them to my first year experience program in a way that is going to support our students and their success? So at ACU, we talk about the intentionality of the Honeypie practice. So take that off and just say intentionality of the first year experience. The intentionality of your first year experience. How are you going to design it? How are you going to make sure the students have access, the students can have access to it? How are you going to think about the outcomes, the defined results? We say learning outcomes, but this can be any outcomes. What are your desired results for the students who participate in your first year experience programs? Have you articulated that in a clear way? And then how are you going to assess whether or not you've achieved that, and whether or not the students are achieving that? Do you know, from an equity perspective, that the students who participate in your first year experience program are actually achieving the goals that you've set forth? That's the intentionality of the design for first year experiences. We talk a lot, and you're going to hear the students talk about this later on this morning, but we call it signature work. Signature work. And this is for a longer, comprehensive process. We know, just like we have the same issue in the United States, we have access to higher education, but it's the success rate that we need to focus in on more. Students gain access. We've made progress in access, that's up. But then getting them to stay and to continue on, our retention rates. At some institutions, their retention rates are higher than others. So a couple of years ago, when we started thinking about our centennial work, we wanted to focus in on the concept of signature work. Imagine a first year experience where students came in, and instead of us giving them the questions that we wanted them to investigate or to interrogate, we asked them about their lived experiences. We asked them about their backgrounds. We asked them about their communities. And we said, how then are the questions that are inherent to your community and your background and your ideals, how do you want to investigate them? What do you want to learn about them? How do you want to engage in research about questions that matter to you? And we've called this signature work at AACU, where you actually engage with questions that are relevant to them. So many of our first year seminars, and this has been happening, this is not something that's new, it's been happening across our institutions. Our first year seminars in the United States, our first year experiences, try to connect students' lived experiences with the curriculum, with the experiences with the different disciplines that they're going to engage with across the institution, and get them to understand the complexities of their questions in a way that says, this matters to you, and we're going to show you how to deeply investigate or how to interrogate questions that matter. So we call that signature work at AAC&U, and then our work that we're doing going forward. This is a project that I did with faculty members from 7 minority-serving institutions in the United States. You can download this from our website, aacu.org, for free. And it's articles from faculty members who engaged in a multi-year project with us on transparency and problem-centered learning. So remember I told you that they had the principles, the general education principles, and one of them was transparency and the other one was on problem-centered inquiry? Well, we took those principles and we tried to apply that to the work that faculty members were doing in their courses and how they were designing their courses to be more transparent and problem-centered. We worked in partnership with our colleagues from the Tilt Center at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And we also worked in partnership with researchers from AAC&U, so that's us, and then also with our faculty members from these institutions that we call team leaders. So we have team leaders at all these institutions. The faculty members looked at their courses. What they did was they looked at their individual courses. And they wanted to create, they had 2 courses that they were taking. They picked 2 courses that were the same. One course they wanted to make more transparent and embed problem-centered learning, very similar to the signature work. And in the other course, they kept it exactly the same. So everybody follow me on that? So they took transparency and they wanted to be more transparent, and then they wanted to create more problem-centered assignments for students to see whether or not that increased the students' sense of belonging and their understanding of the learning outcomes. So we had 35 faculty members across 7 institutions, minority-serving institutions, do this work. It was difficult for some of the faculty members. I just want to be honest with you. It was difficult for some because the whole concept of embedding questions that the students generated versus the faculty member generating the question was, I don't want to say release of authority, but let's say that it did. It required a release of authority in the classroom where the questions came from the students. Even though the content may have come from the faculty member, the questions came from the students. They had difficulties in that, and they talk about that in the publication. But what does it mean to be more transparent? We took a model from UNLV where it was very clear. Remember I told you that it's important to have defined outcomes as part of your first year experiences or anything that you're doing that you're going to call high impact practices. So we took a model from Marianne Winklemas from the UNLV Tilt Center where we said you have to design the assignments to have the purpose, the task, and the criteria. And it has to be clearly stated, the purpose, the task, and the criteria. Because we assume that students understand the purpose and the task and the criteria all the time, but that isn't always the case. So they did that in one of the classes, and they didn't do that in the other class. Then we also asked them to embed problem-centered assignments that were student-generated questions. So what do you think happened for the students who were in the class that was the control class and the class where they had more transparency and problem-centered inquiry? Do you think that the students in the experimental class had a higher sense of belonging and a higher sense of understanding? What do you think? Yes, that's what happened. According to the research, we used a survey. We surveyed the students. We actually had them use our value rubrics. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And the students had a higher sense of belonging. Because, what? They understood. We spent the time being transparent for them and understanding the value of why those experiences matter. Why the courses matter. Yes?
So does that help to grow a sense of agency then?
Yes, exactly. The faculty members, when we debriefed and we had the conversation, they said that they actually felt bad that they were withholding what they had learned to do in their other courses with the students in their control course, because they said that they saw the value, they saw the students making the connection when they were clear in the purpose and the task and the criteria for every assignment, for the assignments that they did that with in their courses, but they didn't do it with their students. So imagine, so let's think about this from a first year experience perspective. If you had your first year experience program, and you clearly set out, this is the purpose of the first year experience, these are the tasks that we're going to engage in, and this is the criteria for measuring your success. And you were clear with them, and up in the beginning, this is what we're going to be transparent. This is important for students because we cannot assume that students automatically know that. We cannot make that assumption. And a lot of times in education, we make that assumption that students, because we've designed this assignment or this first year experience, they know exactly what our desired results are going to be. We can't make that assumption. We shouldn't make that assumption. So when we talk about transparency and problem-centered learning, it is important for us, just like we want our students to reflect, we need to reflect as well on how we are being transparent with what we want to achieve as a result of those experiences. Now I'm going to switch over to assessment just for a few minutes because that's a key part of our cycle of intentional learning. And I don't know whether or not many of you are familiar with our valid assessment of learning in undergraduate education rubrics. How many of you are familiar with that? No, very few people. Okay. So this is a report that was released in February in the United States, that we released, called On Solid Ground. And it's from and you can download it from our website, aacu.org. You talked, when I showed you the learning outcomes, and you said that you want your students to be critical thinkers, you want them to have strong communication skills, you want them to have quantitative reasoning skills, ethical reasoning skills. You're shaking your head, so these are your graduating attributes. How do you know that the students are actually achieving those skills? How do you know that as a desired result, the students are achieving it? So this is our way at ASU in the United States of looking at students' actual work products. So we released a report called On Solid Ground, where it's a proof of concept, where we're looking at students' actual work products from their participation in courses or in high-impact practices, which one of them could be the first year experience, to see if they are achieving the desired results. This is an approach to assessing learning. It's an approach to assessing learning. It's called the Valid Assessment of Learning in Undergraduate Education. You can download all of this from our website. So this is not anything that's proprietary. We want you to use it. We want you to think about how then are you helping students understand what is valuable to them in the learning experience. So value is we articulate very clearly the expectations, the expected learning outcomes, what we want, the desired results. This goes back to my comment about intentionality for us. How do we help students be developed as intentional learners? How do we help them have a sense of belonging, a sense of understanding about their educational experience and their journey? Is that we actually articulate very clearly what the expectations are in the learning process. We articulate that clearly, and we say this is what you need to demonstrate to show that you're developing as learners. This is a philosophy of learning. This is a philosophy of learning where the focus is on looking at students' actual work products, looking at what they actually do as a result of their experience in first-year experience programs, or a result of their participation in first-year experience programs, or undergraduate research, or service learning, or global and diversity learning experiences. And it's not just in the curriculum, it's in the co-curriculum and beyond. This is not a standardized test. They help guide students, it engages conversations with faculty, and it's about transparency, one of the key principles that I was talking about earlier. And it focuses on the cumulative learning experience. So I'm going to go to this. So we have rubrics that were developed by faculty across the United States in all of these categories. We have rubrics in these categories that you can download. This is important for the first year experience piece because it goes back to transparency. If you want students to develop, to say, the reason why you are pursuing your degree at university, the reason why you are pursuing your higher education experience is because we want you to achieve the graduate attributes. We want you to be critical thinkers. We want you to be ethical, engage in ethical reasoning, understand that. We want you to understand quantitative reasoning. We want you to have strong written communication skills. Not everyone understands what that actually is. But engaging them, students, early on in those conversations, is critical because they need to understand, what does it mean you want me to be creative? That my experience at university will help me to be creative. What does it mean that you want me to improve my teamwork or my problem-solving skills? That's the value of an educational experience. So what we do, and I'm sorry for this because this is hard to read. This is an example of one. I just want to say, you can download this at ACMU for free. We give the definition of, for example, of what does it mean to be a critical thinker. We also give the framing language. We also give a glossary of terms. Like, how do you actually define what's ambiguity? What are assumptions? We explain that. These are for conversations for you to have with students. This is not for grading. This is for conversations to be transparent with students. These were developed by faculty members all across the United States, not by ACMU, but by faculty members. And I'm sorry for this again, I apologize, but you can download this and you can see this. Here we have the criteria. How often do we work with students and ask them to use evidence in a way that is not just by looking at assumptions? That we actually ask them to provide the context for their evidence, and that at university you're going to actually experience the ability to develop these skill sets. Then we ask them on the levels. We have levels 1, 2, 3, or 4. So a student who's a first-year student may actually be over here at this level. But as they progress through university, they actually may be over here and develop as a 3 or a 4 level. Then we give them the performance descriptors. And this is the key part, the performance descriptors. This informs the design. When I work at our Institute for High Impact Practices and Student Success, we have 48 institutions, teams from 48 institutions coming to Boston University in June to work with us. They are going to get our value rubrics. They're going to get them. And in their student success models, I am going to challenge them to map the experiences that students will participate in order for them to be successful, map them to the performance descriptors that we have said that if students who participate in our educational experience are going to develop these proficiencies. They will have to map it to it so that it's not something where we're developing processes or developing systems that are not informed by what we already know are key factors for student success. This is important because this goes back to our intentionality of design when you're thinking about your first year experience. I want you to think critically about the performance descriptors. What is it that you want your students to actually do and to learn as part of your first year experience programs that will actually help them have a higher sense of belonging, a higher sense of understanding of the value of them pursuing their educational degree? What is it that you want them to learn? I'm encouraging you to think about that in a way that is critical. So here it is. What are promising direct assessment strategies for evaluating students' achievement of the learning outcomes, or for you it would be the graduation attributes, as a result of their participation in, take out this high impact practice and put in first year experience? How are you going to know that your program is successful? How are you going to know that students are actually learning? That they are meeting the performance descriptors or the desired results that you set forth as part of your first year experience program? How will you know? And how will you be transparent with them? How will you value their lived experiences? And not tell them to leave them at the door, but to actually integrate them into their learning journey. How would you do that? How will you do that? How will you value the diversity of their backgrounds to help foster a sense of belonging? Those are the questions that I'm going to ask you. How can you provide higher levels of transparency for them? And don't assume that they understand the value of the first year experience. How will you actually be more transparent about how this experience is tied to their lifelong success and their preparation beyond just completing the degree? And how will you think it? What are the performance descriptors? What are the performance descriptors? How do you want them to engage in the first year experience? What is it that you want them to actually do that will inform the design of your first year experience? Those are the questions that we should be asking. Those are the questions that we're going to talk about today as you hear from the students from the University of Michigan. You're going to hear from them. You're going to hear about what they've learned from their research and from their studies in relation to the sense of belonging and having diversity of experiences. How do you embed those into the first year experience in a way that is intentional? Going back to our question, how do you help students develop as intentional learners? And what is the role of the first year experience in that process? So I have a lot more to share, but I'm going to stop there because I have 10 minutes and I want to save time for questions. And we're here this morning. We're going to have this conversation. Betty and the team from the University of Michigan, we're going to have conversations. You're going to see what this actually looks like when we're talking about sense of belonging, when we're focusing in on the diversity of our students, where we're engaging their lived experience, where we're getting them to ask questions that are relevant to them. And how do you create a comprehensive first year experience that you have defined desired results and that you're assessing that in a way that is foundational for you to be a student-ready educator, for you to be ready for the students that you actually serve, for the students who are actually engaged in your educational environment. How then are you going to become ready for the students that you have today and tomorrow at your institutions? So thank you so much.